Here's a number that should scare you more than any nanoweapon in this show. 100. That's how many people per Stensen planned to put inside each silo before the world ended. Not after, before. And by the end of Grey Goo, that one small detail changes everything we thought we knew about who built these tombs and who was living in them first. Stick around, because today we're not just recapping Episode 8. We're building a case. A case that the founding population of the silos wasn't a group of desperate survivors pulled in after an apocalypse. It was a test group, employees, volunteers, people who knew exactly what a silo was, who built it and why, right up until they didn't anymore. Let's get into it. Episode 8 opens by cleaning up last week's cliffhanger fast. Lucas and Kennedy both survive the attack on the surface. Kennedy walks away, basically untouched. Lucas takes a hit to the shoulder, and, this part matters, his suit gets punctured on the way. Now, if you've been watching this show since Season 1, you know the rule. A punctured suit outside the silo means a death sentence. Toxic air. Poison in the wind. 3 minutes, and you're done. Lucas doesn't die. That's not a plot hole. That's the writers handing you a magnifying glass. The show has spent 3 seasons telling everyone inside the silo that the outside world is uniformly, permanently lethal. Episode 8 quietly proves that story is, at best, incomplete. Because here's the thing, this doesn't mean the surface is suddenly safe. The landscape is still wrecked. There could still be drones patrolling. There could still be leftover nanotech drifting through certain zones at certain times. What it does mean is that death outside isn't a constant. It's a decision. Somebody, or something, is choosing when the air becomes a weapon and when it doesn't. Suddenly, a lot of old mysteries make a different kind of sense. Why did Juliet's modified tape actually matter, if the air itself was the threat? Why do cleaners with intact suits die on a predictable timer, almost like clockwork, while Lucas walks around with a hole in his? The simplest explanation the Pact ever gave residents, the outside kills, full stop, just took a direct hit. And once you start pulling that thread, the whole foundation of silo mythology gets shaky. Inside Silo 17, Lucas and Kennedy finally get the answer Jimmy has been chasing his entire life. What happened to his mom? Turns out she didn't vanish in the chaos of the silo's collapse. She went into the chamber connected to the internal kill system, and she stopped it from inside, manually. Then she sealed herself in with whatever had already gotten through. That's not a throwaway detail. That's the first documented case in the entire series of a regular person physically overriding one of these silo-wide extermination systems. And she paid for it with her life, alone, in a sealed room, with no one to tell her it worked. Here's the distinction the show wants you to notice. Stopping that internal pipe protected the people who stayed inside Silo 17. It did not make the outside world safe once the survivors eventually opened the door. 2 separate weapons. One for containment, one for the boundary. She beat one of them, not both. And this is where the show earns its emotional weight for the episode. Kennedy, of all people, the guy from Judicial, the guy who spent most of this season as an antagonist, is the one who gives Jimmy something no engineering report could. He gives him a funeral. He turns an unidentified body in a sealed chamber back into a mother. There's a line Kennedy says about not knowing anyone who died. He just woke up one day and everyone was gone. That's the entire tragedy of Silo 17 in one sentence. Not a slow trickle of loss. An instant, total erasure of an entire social world. And notice the pattern, because it repeats. The system that runs these silos reduces human beings to statistics, casualties, failed silos, successful resets. Kennedy's one small act, giving a nameless body a name again, is the opposite move. It's the show telling you exactly what its bigger mystery is actually about. Not machinery. People the system tried to erase. Back in Silo 18, we get one of the most important conversations of the entire season, between Bernard and Juliet. Bernard finally admits it out loud. He poisoned Meadows, a woman he genuinely cared about. He did it because he was told her death was necessary for the silo's survival, and Bernard has always operated on that logic. Other people see murder. Bernard sees a decision. Other people see coercion. Bernard sees procedure. But now he knows something he didn't know then. The voice manipulated him into that decision. Meadows didn't die because every other option had been exhausted. She died because Bernard trusted a system that was feeding him a curated version of necessary. Juliet doesn't forgive him for this. That's important, and the show is careful about it. Understanding somebody's reasoning is not the same as absolving them. What changes is how she categorizes him. She stops seeing him purely as the guy at the top pulling strings, and starts seeing him as something else entirely. A test subject. Bernard believed he was standing above the silo, making cold, necessary calls on its behalf. Episode 8 suggests he was never outside the experiment at all. He was just given a little more access than everyone else, more instructions, more clearance, but never the full picture. He's not the architect. He's a senior administrator locked inside somebody else's enclosure, powerful compared to the people below him, and completely blind to whoever's actually running things from outside. That reframes his entire arc for the rest of the season. His real test isn't whether he switches sides. It's whether he can act without permission, for once in his life, instead of ordering someone else to absorb the risk. He sent cleaners to die. He authorized arrests. He poisoned a woman he loved because a voice on a screen told him to. Jimmy's mother did the opposite. She didn't send anyone into that chamber. She went in herself. The show puts those two stories side by side in the same episode on purpose. If Bernard is actually going to change, he doesn't get to do it from a control room. Now here's a decision that looks reckless on the surface, but is actually the smartest move Juliet makes all season. She turns herself into judicial. Think about what she's been doing up to this point, dodging surveillance, slipping through hidden passages, keeping the resistance invisible. And now she just walks straight into the one part of the silo controlled by Camille. But her logic holds up. As long as she's missing, every officer in Judicial is actively hunting for her, which means Mechanical stays under a microscope, her friends get tailed, and any attempt to reach the safeguard pipe happens while the entire security apparatus is on high alert looking for one specific person. Take that person off the board voluntarily, and Camille thinks the crisis is handled. That buys the rest of the network room to move. There's also a more strategic angle. Judicial is the one part of the silo the resistance eventually needs to breach anyway. Juliet couldn't guarantee exactly where she'd end up, but surrender puts her physically closer to the institutional center of power than hiding in Mechanical ever could. And then Camille makes what might be the biggest tactical mistake of her tenure. She throws Juliet in a cell with Robert Sims. Sims knows Judicial inside and out. Personnel habits, internal structure, the security culture of the building. Juliet knows the engineering side, the safeguard, the pipe, the people organizing underneath everyone's feet. Separated, each of them is limited. Together, in one cell, they've got both the technical knowledge and the institutional access to actually pull this off. Camille thinks she's locked away two defeated enemies. She's actually built a war room. As for Camille herself, Episode 8 quietly kills off one popular fan theory. The idea that she's been secretly running the show all along, playing everyone including the voice itself. That doesn't track anymore. She genuinely believes Safeguard can't be beaten, and she genuinely believes her family dies if she picks the wrong side. But she's not a true believer either. She pushes back. She asks the voice how the Safeguard could actually be stopped. She wants to know what Juliet's people learned in Silo 17. And she notices, correctly, that the voice seems unusually anxious about this particular mission. That's the entire relationship in one scene. Camille controls the institutions. The voice controls the information. She's compliant because she's scared, and she stays scared because she's never given enough to act on her own. Her loyalty has a price, and that price is her family's safety. Take away the threat to them, and there's no reason left for her to keep playing along. Billings and Hank finally close the Orla Kent case. Her killer wasn't some assassin sent by the system. It was her own boyfriend, Mike Davidson, who'd been stealing supplies and killed her when she found out. On paper, that's a deflating answer after weeks of build-up. But the investigation was never really about who pulled the trigger. It's what the investigation dragged out into the open along the way. It pulled Billings into critical supply. It exposed Harwood's lies. It confirmed Gus Knox was alive. And it uncovered an illegal lift hidden between sections of the silo that should require a much longer trip by stairs. That lift is the real payoff here, not the murder weapon. Harwood claims the missing light bulbs were taken as leverage during the earlier rebellion, but that explanation has holes in it. Moving decades' worth of critical lighting into the mines is an enormous risk, and building a hidden lift takes planning that clearly started before the last uprising even happened. So the murder case closes, but a much bigger question opens. What were those bulbs actually meant to power? Why was faking Gus's death worth the trouble? What needed a private, unauthorized transport route between critical supply and the mines? Here's what I find genuinely clever about this episode structurally. The present-day plot gives you one small, illegal transportation system built in secret inside a silo. The flashback plot gives you an entire hidden civilization built in secret before the public even knew it existed. Same pattern, different scale. Somebody notices resources moving where they shouldn't. Then they find infrastructure that isn't supposed to exist at all. That's not a coincidence. That's the show's structure talking to itself. Now let's talk about the title, because this is where the episode goes from good television to genuinely unsettling. The Before Time storyline finally reveals what attacked Charlotte's squadron back in the season premiere. It wasn't a conventional weapon. It was nanotechnology, and according to reporting on the episode, the mission itself was mostly a sacrificial distraction, a way to gauge exactly how far along a rival nation's nanoweapon program had gotten. The cloud that hit her aircraft was that weapon in action. For anyone who hasn't run into the term before, gray goo is a real theoretical concept, and it predates this show by decades. It describes a hypothetical worst-case scenario where self-replicating molecular machines slip outside of human control, start consuming whatever material is around them, and just keep making copies of themselves indefinitely. It's a staple of serious nanotechnology discourse. The idea shows up in academic papers going back to the 1980s. And to be clear, mainstream scientific reviews treat an uncontrolled, planet-consuming version of this as extremely unlikely with current or near-term technology. Silo isn't claiming this is a real, imminent danger sitting in a lab somewhere. It's using the concept the way good science fiction always has, as a lens for a very human problem, not a technical prediction. And the human problem here is deterrence. A nuclear weapon takes infrastructure, money, and time to build, and it's relatively easy to detect once you know what you're looking for. A sufficiently advanced nanoweapon could, in theory, be smaller, cheaper, and nearly invisible until it's already operating. Once more than one government has that capability, the whole logic of mutually assured destruction stops working the way it used to, because you can't necessarily see the threat coming. Stensen isn't claiming he knows the exact date the world ends. His argument is scarier than that. He's arguing that humanity has entered a window where a single lab, a single government, or a single mistake could trigger something irreversible. And once you accept that framing, building 50 underground arcs doesn't sound insane anymore. It sounds inevitable. That's what makes him more dangerous than your standard doomsday billionaire. He might actually be right about the risk. The real question the show is asking is what he thinks that risk gives him permission to do. Okay? Here's where we connect every thread we've pulled so far into one theory, and I think it's the biggest implication of the entire episode. Stensen has already bought enormous tracts of land near Atlanta. Machines are excavating 50 silos before any confirmed extinction event has happened. And during a planning dinner, we learn the actual rollout plan. It's not finish building, then wait for disaster. It's put roughly 100 people inside each silo first, to test whether the whole system actually works. Stop and sit with that for a second. That's 5,000 living human test subjects, spread across 50 sealed environments, before the world above them has ended. And you can't test a closed ecosystem with a guided tour. You need people who actually live there, sleeping there, eating there, running the water system, growing food, fixing the generator, handling waste, surviving each other's company under real pressure over real time. Hardware gets tested by engineers on paper. A silo can only be tested by building a miniature society inside it and watching what breaks. Which means there were people living underground before the apocalypse. People who knew the surface still existed. People who knew the real date. People who knew exactly who built this thing and why. People who entered as employees, contractors, specialists, or volunteers, and who fully expected to walk back out once the test was finished. That expectation is the actual problem the founders eventually have to solve. Here's how I think it plays out, based on everything the show has already put on screen. Phase 1. Recruitment. Every silo needs engineers, medics, farmers, technicians, security, and nobody gets the complete picture. One person knows the generator. Another knows filtration. Compartmentalized from day one. Phase 2. The live test itself. 100 people per silo, running the systems, working out the kinks, following provisional rules that everyone still understands are temporary. Then the emergency hits. Whether that's the nanotech disaster Stensen feared, open war using these weapons, or something else entirely, the show hasn't confirmed which yet. And the doors close while the test teams are still inside. More people might get rushed in during the chaos, which is exactly how you'd explain a jump from 100 residents to a much larger founding population. The test staff become the operational core, because they're the only ones who actually understand how anything works. At first, the founders can honestly tell them it's temporary. Then temporary stretches into months. The surface stays sealed. And the test population starts asking the questions you'd expect. Why can't we contact our families? Why are there drones outside? Why are people no longer giving straight answers? That's exactly the moment a memory suppression system becomes essential. Not as a punishment for a later rebellion, but as the mechanism that turns an informed, questioning workforce into a compliant founding population from the very start. We already know the tech existed early. It's implied Charlotte herself experienced some version of memory interference before the silos were even finished. By Juliet's era, that same basic principle has clearly been refined into a population-wide delivery system through the water supply. Picture the first generation being told contamination or trauma requires ongoing treatment. They drink it. The specific memories, the final months on the surface, the test schedule, faces, names, exact locations start to erode. But practical knowledge sticks around. An engineer still knows how to run a generator, even if he can't remember signing up for the job. The system doesn't need to erase every skill a person has. It just needs to erase the specific knowledge that would let a population organize and resist. The kids born after that point never need convincing. They just inherit the story from parents whose own memories were already edited. The deception becomes culture, passed down as fact. And every later full reset isn't a new invention. It's a repeat of that original founding event, run again whenever too many people start reconstructing the truth on their own. That also explains something that's bothered me about this show for 2 seasons. Why the system defines success so coldly. A reset can kill thousands of people and still get filed as a success, as long as the silo keeps operating afterward. The goal was never the welfare of any individual resident. The goal is the uninterrupted continuation of the experiment itself. Quick gut check on that Pez dispenser everyone's been theorizing about since Season 1, because this theory actually gives it the simplest possible explanation. Helen and Daniel appear to walk away from Stensen's offer by helicopter at the end of the flashback, but that clearly isn't the end of their connection to this project, because that same dispenser, a gift from Daniel to Helen, turns up centuries later inside Silo 18. It's too personal, too specific to be standard issue equipment. If Helen ends up entering the beta population herself, or if it enters with someone close to her, the whole chain makes sense without needing any convoluted coincidence. She carries it because it represents her and Daniel. She goes in expecting the situation to be temporary. Her memory gets altered along the way. The object survives, because memory suppression edits what's in someone's head. It doesn't reach into their pockets and confiscate physical belongings. Personal items get hidden, inherited, passed through families, forgotten and rediscovered, long after the people who owned them stopped remembering where they came from. That's also, notably, close to what the show's own writers have said publicly about the arc. That this before-time storyline exists specifically to explain how the world we already know came to be, and that Daniel and Helen's choice to stay connected to each other rather than simply flee the situation is the emotional engine of where this whole flashback is heading. Whether they physically end up as residents of Silo 18 specifically is still an open question, but the show has now put every piece on the board to make that connection. Now, the obvious objection. Silo 18 has roughly 10,000 residents. 100 test subjects don't magically become 10,000 people overnight. They don't need to. The theory doesn't require the beta group to become the entire population, just the founding nucleus. Once the actual emergency hits, more people get pulled in. selected families, government personnel, construction crews already on site, local residents near the Georgia location. The original 100 keep the systems running and manage the intake of everyone else. From there, ordinary population growth across 3 centuries does the rest of the work. This also doesn't require the 300-year timeline to be some kind of trick or lie. The silos really can be that old. The beta testers go in at the very beginning. Their memories get edited, and their descendants inherit a rewritten history as unquestioned fact. The mystery was never that less time passed than we think. The mystery is that the first generation actually knew the full truth and was systematically prevented from ever passing it down. That there's a colder version of this theory worth mentioning before we wrap up. What if Stensen doesn't just predict the catastrophe? What if he eventually causes it or speeds it up? He's got the money, the expertise, and, as of this episode, 50 enormous secret excavation sites already underway. If this project ever gets exposed before an actual apocalypse happens, it becomes the biggest financial and political scandal in human history. Triggering the emergency himself would let him control exactly when the doors close and exactly who's already inside when they do. To be fair, the episode doesn't prove this. Stensen could be completely sincere in believing the world is genuinely approaching an unavoidable threshold. And given that we've already seen nanotechnology used as an actual weapon between nations in this story, that belief isn't unreasonable. The theory doesn't even need him to deliberately end the world for the outcome to be the same. A real catastrophe happening while his test groups are already sealed inside produces an identical result either way. What actually matters isn't whether he lit the fuse. What matters is that he already built a fireproof box, put human beings inside it, and engineered a system specifically designed to stop them from ever leaving. Based on everything Episode 8 sets up, here's where I think the next 2 episodes are headed. 1. Helen and Daniel's exit isn't permanent. Something pulls them back toward this project, whether that's Charlotte, political pressure, or the escalating nanotech crisis, and Helen ends up directly tied to what becomes Silo 18. 2. Expect to actually see the formal launch or trial occupation of at least one silo before the world ends on screen, with people going in fully understanding it's meant to be temporary. 3. The first population-wide memory intervention should land right around the moment that temporary quietly becomes permanent, and it'll get sold as medical treatment or contamination control, not control for its own sake. 4. Charlotte's role should end up establishing the doctrine or infrastructure behind exterior drone surveillance, in a way that doesn't require her personally to survive for 300 years. Her training, her decisions, get inherited by the system that follows her. And 5. Later full resets, including the ones we've already seen in the present-day timeline, should end up using language or procedures that trace directly back to this original beta test protocol. The system measures success in structural continuity, not in how many individual people survived. Here's the actual test for whether any of this holds up. If the remaining episodes show every beta tester walking out safely, a completely separate population entering only after the apocalypse, and that Pez dispenser reaching Silo 18 without Helen or her circle ever becoming residents, this theory falls apart cleanly, and I'll say so. But if Helen and Daniel come back, if people start occupying these silos before the extinction event actually happens, and if memory treatment shows up right as the doors finally close for good, then the first full reset in this entire universe didn't happen after humanity moved underground. It happened the moment a rehearsal quietly turned into forever.